king once ruled with such terrifying power that people believed the earth itself moved at his command. His armies stretched beyond the horizon. His palaces touched the clouds. His word meant life or death. This was Nimrod, a ruler so consumed by power, so intoxicated by his own greatness, that he dared to say the unthinkable. He was God, not a servant of power, not chosen by power, but power itself. And for a time, the world seemed to agree. Kingdoms bowed, warriors trembled, nations surrendered before battle even began. To the people, Nimrod looked invincible. A man beyond defeat, a king untouched by fear, a ruler who believed no force in existence could ever challenge him. But arrogance has always had one fatal weakness: it blinds. And Nimrod was so blinded by pride, he could no longer see the storm gathering around him, because while he mocked the heavens, while he built monuments to his own greatness, while he demanded worship from human beings, Allah was already writing the ending, not with thunder, not with fire, not with armies, but with something so small, so fragile, so insignificant, that no king on earth would ever consider it a threat, a mosquito. And that is what makes this story so terrifying. The mightiest tyrant of his age, the man who believed death itself answered to him, would one day be reduced to helpless agony by a creature smaller than a fingertip. But before we reveal how Allah shattered the pride of the king who challenged the heavens, subscribe now and comment, Allah is the greatest. If you believe no throne, no ruler, and no power can ever stand against the will of Allah. Because what happens next is one of the most chilling lessons in arrogance ever told. Nimrod was not simply a king. He was a symbol of what happens when power corrupts the soul. The more people praised him, the more his heart hardened. Wealth turned into ego. Authority turned into tyranny. Success turned into delusion. Until eventually, he no longer saw himself as a man. He saw himself as divine. And then came the moment that changed history forever. A young prophet stood before him, calm, fearless, unshaken. Prophet Ibrahim, alayhi salam. One man carrying the truth, standing before a king carrying an empire. This was not merely a conversation. It was a collision between truth and arrogance, between divine guidance and human ego, between the Creator's message and a ruler drunk on false godhood. Nimrod laughed at the warning. He mocked the message. He believed Ibrahim alayhi salam was powerless. But what he did not understand was that every word of truth he rejected was bringing him closer to the most humiliating punishment imaginable. And when that punishment finally came, the entire world would witness a lesson that would echo until the end of time: the fall of a king by a mosquito. Nimrod's rise did not begin with madness. It began with victory. One battle won, then another. One city conquered, then 10 more. Every triumph fed the illusion that destiny itself had chosen him. His kingdom spread across lands so vast that travelers spent months crossing borders still ruled by his name. Gold poured into his keys like rivers after rain. Armies marched beneath banners that darkened the horizon. And wherever those banners appeared, fear arrived first. At the beginning, power felt like responsibility. But power, when left unchecked, changes a man slowly. Not in one moment, not in one decision, but in silent layers. Praise became addiction. Obedience became expectation. Control became identity. The people around him no longer spoke truth. They spoke survival. Every word was crafted to protect their lives. Every compliment became fuel for the fire already burning inside his chest. And the more the world bowed, the more Nimrod mistook fear for love. This is how tyranny is born. Not merely from cruelty, but from a heart that begins to believe it deserves absolute control. Nimrod no longer saw himself as a ruler among men. He saw himself as something higher. His palaces grew larger. His throne rose higher. His entrances became spectacles designed to overwhelm the senses. People were forced to kneel before they could even look at him. And over time, something terrifying happened. The ritual of respect transformed into ritual worship. At first, the people obeyed because they feared punishment, because prisons waited for doubters, because swords answered hesitation. But fear repeated long enough begins to resemble belief. Children were raised hearing his greatness. Soldiers swore loyalty to his name before battle. Merchants thanked him for prosperity that belonged only to Allah, and Nimrod watched it all, absorbing every gesture, every bowed head, every trembling voice, until delusion consumed the last remains of humility. Success had poisoned him. What once was confidence became arrogance. What once was leadership became domination. What once was authority became false divinity. Then came the moment his corruption reached its peak. Before nobles, soldiers, priests, and terrified citizens, Nimrod stood upon his towering throne and made the declaration that froze the hearts of all who heard it. He was not merely king, he was their God. The hall fell silent. No one believed it in their hearts, but no one dared challenge him, because tyranny does not need faith. It only needs fear, and fear had become the foundation of his empire. From that day forward, worship was demanded. Praise was enforced. Submission was law. The people did not obey because they loved him. They obeyed because terror had trained their souls into silence. But the higher Nimrod climbed into arrogance, the closer he moved towards the edge of destruction. Because every tyrant makes the same mistake. They begin to think power can protect them from truth. And Nimrod's greatest mistake was still ahead. Because Allah was about to send him a messenger he could not intimidate, a prophet whose faith could not be bought, whose heart could not be shaken, and whose word would strike the first crack in the throne of false godhood. Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam was coming, and for the first time in his life, Nimrod would stand before someone who feared Allah more than they feared kings. The day Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam entered Nimrod's court, the air itself felt heavy. Rows of armored soldiers lined the hall, like statues of iron. Nobles stood in perfect silence. Servants lowered their eyes. No one breathed freely in the presence of the king who demanded worship. At the far end of the chamber, Nimrod sat upon a throne raised so high it forced every visitor to look up. It was designed for one purpose, to make men feel small. But Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam did not lower his gaze in fear. He stood calm, steady, untouched by the theatre of power surrounding him, and that calmness alone disturbed the king, because Nimrod was used to trembling voices, shaking knees, broken spirits. But this young prophet stood with a certainty greater than armies. The court waited. Then Nimrod's voice thundered through the chamber. "Who is this Lord you call people to worship?" The question was not curiosity. It was a challenge, a trap meant to crush the courage of anyone who dared oppose him. But Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam answered with the simplicity of truth. "My Lord is the one who gives life and causes death." A murmur moved through the court. Nimrod leaned forward. A smile of arrogance slowly formed across his face. He thought he had found a way to turn truth into spectacle. With a gesture of his hand, 2 prisoners were dragged before the throne. One was sentenced to execution. The other was suddenly set free. Nimrod rose, spreading his arms before the crowd, as if unveiling proof of his own divinity. "Look," he declared, "give life and death." The hall erupted in fearful approval, not because they believed him, but because survival demanded applause. For a brief moment, Nimrod thought he had won. He believed power had outsmarted truth. But then Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam spoke again, and with one sentence, he shattered the illusion of the entire court. Indeed, Allah brings the sun from the east. The room fell still. Every eye turned towards him. Then came the words that would wound the ego of a tyrant more deeply than any sword ever could. "So bring it from the west." Silence. Not ordinary silence. The kind of silence that freezes time. The torches crackled. Armor plates stopped moving. Even the air in the chamber felt motionless. Nimrod's face changed. For the first time, the king who claimed godhood had no performance left. No prisoner to manipulate. No sword to hide behind. No illusion strong enough to answer divine truth. Because truth had cornered him in front of everyone. His lips parted, but no words came. The nobles who once praised him now stared in stunned stillness. The soldiers who enforced his arrogance stood frozen. The people who feared him witnessed something they had never seen before. Their God, silenced. In that moment, the throne no longer looked powerful. It looked fragile. Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam had done what armies could not. He humiliated falsehood with a single truth. Power had met revelation. Arrogance had met wisdom. And wisdom had won without raising a weapon. But for a man like Nimrod, public humiliation was more dangerous than defeat in battle, because tyrants can survive being challenged. What they cannot survive is being exposed. And from that humiliation, Nimrod's hatred only grew. The silence of that courtroom never left Nimrod. Long after Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam had gone, long after the nobles returned to their chambers, long after the torches dimmed against the palace walls, those words still echoed inside his mind. So bring it from the west. It was not just a response. It was humiliation. A wound carved directly into the ego of a king who had spent his life controlling every voice around him. Nimrod could conquer nations. He could silence scholars. He could bend armies to his will. But he could not move the sun. And that truth poisoned him. What began as anger soon transformed into obsession. He could not accept that there existed a power beyond his throne, a force greater than his armies, a lord whose signs no king could imitate. His pride would not allow it. So instead of reflecting, instead of submitting, Nimrod chose war, not against Ibrahim alayhi salam, against Allah. The command spread through the empire like wildfire. Builders, engineers, laborers, slaves, thousands were gathered from every corner of the kingdom, stone after stone, brick after brick. The earth itself was forced to carry the madness of a tyrant. A tower began to rise. At first the people whispered in confusion, then fear, then horror, because this was no monument to legacy. This was rebellion turned into architecture. A structure so massive it clawed at the sky. Its shadow swallowed villages. Its height became a symbol of human arrogance, attempting to challenge the heavens. Nimrod stood before it, with burning eyes, watching it rise higher each day. He no longer wanted worship from earth alone. He wanted the throne above. He declared before his court that he would ascend into the heavens, that he would reach the God of Ibrahim alayhi salam himself. Imagine the darkness of that moment. A man so consumed by delusion that he mistook altitude for authority. The higher the tower climbed, the deeper Nimrod's sanity collapsed. Sleep abandoned him. Reason left him. Every sunrise became another insult, because the sun still rose from the east beyond his control. And so the tower became more than stone. It became the physical form of his madness. Every brick was pride. Every staircase was rebellion. Every level higher was another step away from humility. The people obeyed, but not from belief. They obeyed because fear had erased the courage to resist. Deep down, many already knew what was coming. No one wages war against Allah and remains standing. Yet Nimrod could not see it. Success had blinded him for too long. Power had insulated him from truth. His victories had convinced him that consequences were for ordinary men. This is the final stage of tyranny. The moment a ruler no longer believes he is accountable to anything beyond himself. That is when arrogance becomes self-destruction. The tower pierced the clouds. The king smiled. In his delusion, he believed the heavens were now within reach, that the Lord of Ibrahim alayhi salam could somehow be challenged by stone, height, and human ambition. But Allah does not need armies to destroy arrogance. He only waits until pride reaches its highest point, because the fall is always greater from there. Nimrod believed he had become untouchable, and that is exactly when Allah's punishment began. Nimrod expected punishment to look like war. After all, that was a language he understood. Armies marching across horizons, thunder splitting the sky, fire consuming cities, mountains shaking beneath divine wrath. That is how a king imagines destruction. Something worthy of his status, something grand enough to match the size of his ego. But Allah's punishment does not follow the imagination of tyrants. It follows perfect wisdom. And so, when the moment finally came, there was no storm, no fire, no army, only a sound so small it barely deserved notice. The faint buzz of a mosquito. At first Nimrod laughed. How could something so insignificant threaten the ruler who commanded nations? This was the same man who had built towers into the clouds. The same king whose soldiers covered the earth like waves. A mosquito? To him it was almost insulting. He mocked the weakness of it. A tiny creature circling the chambers of a palace built for false greatness. But arrogance always underestimates what Allah chooses. The mosquito drew closer. A flicker of movement near the king's face. A servant moved to swat it away. Too late. In a moment so quick no one understood what had happened. The creature entered him. Some narrations describe it entering through his nose. Others mention the ear, but the result was the same. By Allah's command, that tiny creature reached the place no army ever could, his brain, and then the suffering began. At first it was discomfort, a sharp pressure behind the eyes, a pain like a needle buried deep inside the skull. Nimrod dismissed it. A king does not fear headaches. But this was no ordinary pain. It grew, minute by minute, hour by hour. A torment spreading through his mind like fire trapped beneath bone. Soon the mighty ruler who once terrified nations was clutching his own head. His breathing turned frantic. His eyes widened with panic. The palace erupted into chaos. Doctors were summoned. Magicians rushed in with charms and rituals. Priests muttered desperate words. Servants ran through corridors carrying oils, herbs, tools, anything that might stop the agony. Nothing worked. No medicine could reach it. No spell could touch it. No wealth could buy relief. The creature remained, by Allah's will, tormenting the king from within. This is the irony that makes the story unforgettable. The man who challenged the Lord of the heavens was being destroyed from the inside by one of the weakest creatures on earth. His pride collapsed first, then his dignity, then his image of invincibility. Days passed in unbearable torment. The king, who once sat above all men, now rolled on the floor of his chamber in helpless pain. His cries echoed through palace walls that once carried commands of arrogance. And then came the ultimate humiliation. The only momentary relief he found was when someone struck his head. So servants were ordered to stand near him with sandals, sticks, or their hands, hitting his skull again and again to ease the pain for a moment. Think of the reversal. The man who once demanded people bow before him now begged them to strike his head. Every blow shattered another piece of the illusion he had built around himself. No throne could save him. No army could defend him. No false claim of godhood could silence the agony Allah had decreed. The king, who thought himself untouchable, had become the most helpless man in his own palace. The final days of Nimrod did not resemble the life he had built. There were no triumphant marches, no roaring crowds, no nobles praising his greatness. Only darkness, only pain, only the endless sound of a broken man begging for relief. The mosquito remained where Allah had decreed it to remain, tormenting him from within. Every passing moment felt heavier than the last. The pressure in his skull became a punishment beyond imagination, sharp, relentless, humiliating. The mighty king who once sat above nations could no longer sit upright on his throne. He lay curled in his chambers, hands pressed against his head, his body trembling beneath the weight of agony no physician could explain. Around him stood the same servants who once lowered their faces in fear. Now they held sticks, sandals, and rods, not to defend him, to strike him, again, and again, and again. Each blow gave him a second of relief before the torment returned even stronger. So the order remained. Hit harder. Do not stop. Imagine the collapse of that image. The ruler who forced millions to bow now depended on servants, beating his skull just to survive another hour. The palace corridors, once filled with commands of arrogance, now echoed with desperate screams. Word spread beyond the palace walls. The people began to hear what was happening to the man who claimed divinity. At first, whispers moved through markets and homes. Then witnesses came. Soldiers, servants, palace attendants, those who had seen the God King writhing helplessly on the floor. The illusion shattered in the minds of the people. This was the one they had been forced to worship. This was the being they were told controlled life and death. Yet he could not control the pain inside his own head. He could not command it to stop, could not threaten it, could not bribe it, could not conquer it. For the first time, the empire saw the truth with unbearable clarity. False greatness always collapses when tested by reality. His authority began to crumble long before his final breath. Fear loosened its grip on the people. The throne no longer inspired awe. The palace no longer looked eternal. Because once a tyrant's weakness becomes visible, his myth dies before he does. And Nimrod's myth was dying in full view of the world. Days of torment turned into the slow unraveling of everything he had built. The king, who once believed himself untouchable, had been reduced to a warning, a lesson, a symbol of what pride becomes when it stands against Allah. Then at last the decree reached its end. The same tiny creature that had stripped away his dignity, his power, and his illusion of godhood became the cause of his death. No battlefield, no heroic final stand, no army at his gates, just the smallest of Allah's creations completing the judgment of the most powerful. And with that, Nimrod was gone. His towers remained, his palace remained, his treasures remained. But the man who thought himself greater than all of them was carried away, weaker than dust. The king who challenged Allah was not destroyed by an army, but by a creature smaller than a fingertip. Nimrod's story did not survive thousands of years because it was merely shocking. It survived because it is a mirror, not just for kings, not just for tyrants, but for every human heart that begins to confuse blessings with superiority. That is why this story still matters today. Most people will never rule an empire. They will never command armies or build towers that scrape the sky. But arrogance does not need a throne. Sometimes it hides in success, in wealth, in influence, in the quiet belief that what we have was created by our own strength alone. That is where the danger begins, because pride often destroys a person long before punishment ever arrives. It blinds them to truth. It makes advice feel like insult. It turns reminders into irritation. It convinces the soul that it no longer needs guidance. And once the heart reaches that point, the fall has already begun. This is the real lesson of Nimrod. His destruction did not start with the mosquito. It started the moment power made him forget who truly holds power. The moment success became delusion. The moment control became worship. The moment he looked at blessings from Allah and mistook them for proof of his own greatness. That same trap still exists today. A person gains money and begins to look down on others. A leader gains influence and stops listening. A creator gains followers and starts believing praise means perfection. The form changes. The disease stays the same. Pride makes people spiritually deaf before it ever makes them fall publicly. And that is why Nimrod's ending is so terrifyingly relevant. Allah does not need grand means to change any situation. A giant can be humbled by something tiny. A powerful life can change in one unexpected moment. A plan built over decades can collapse through the smallest cause. One phone call, one sentence, one event, one creature smaller than a fingertip. This is why believers never place trust in their own strength alone. They stay humble in success, grateful in ease, careful when praised, and always aware that every blessing survives only by the mercy of Allah. The story of Nimrod teaches us never to underestimate the smallest means Allah uses. Sometimes the greatest lessons arrive through what looks insignificant: a word, a test, a delay, a weakness, even a mosquito. Because when Allah wills something, size means nothing. Power means nothing. Status means nothing. Only His command matters. And that truth should humble every one of us before life humbles us itself. So as this story closes, the question is no longer about Nimrod. It is about us. Where has pride entered our hearts? What blessing have we started taking credit for? What warning have we ignored because success made us feel untouchable? If this story reminded you that no power stands above Allah, subscribe for more powerful Islamic stories. And comment below, what lesson did Nimrod's ending teach you?